Aimed directly at city-living, eco-minded buyers, Toyota's clever Yaris Hybrid is cheaper, cleaner and more frugal than any conventional hybrid model we've yet seen. It may not be the small car you've always dreamed about, but if you're urban-based, it could very well be the one you actually need. Having originally introduced the idea of a hybrid car, it falls to Toyota to democratise it, to make petrol-electric power more accessible, something only possible if it becomes more affordable, in a car like this, their Yaris Hybrid. Introduced here in the summer of 2012, this is by some way the market's most affordable hybrid car. Yet at the same time, assuming you discount pricey plug-in and battery-powered models, it's also the cleanest means of automotive transport yet devised. More to the point, this is the car that finally opens up hybrid ownership to the urban-based market segment that in theory should take to it most, that of super minis. True, it's not the first hybrid super mini we've seen, but it is the first to be able to improve upon the running costs of rival eco-conscious diesel models of this kind, while matching or beating them on price. That makes this car a game changer in its town-targeted market sector, and making it, in theory, an impossible option to ignore for those who spend their lives in the kind of stop-start city traffic in which hybrid technology really comes into its own. Let's put it to the test. Hybrid technology has taken its time to filter down into the super mini segment, but Toyota promises that in this Yaris Hybrid, buyers will feel that it's been worth waiting for. You certainly get all the cleverness that the company's Prius customers pay 50% more for. The standard CVT automatic gearbox, the eco mode that tweaks the throttle response and the aircon to cut fuel consumption, and most importantly, the thing that sets this car apart from the super mini segment's very first petrol-electric contender, Honda's Jazz Hybrid. Namely, the ability, via this EV button down here, to run on electric power alone for short bursts. Such are the benefits of parallel hybrid technology. So what's this car like to drive? Well, I'm not going to assume that you know what the hybrid experience is like, because if you're a typical super mini buyer, then you probably don't. Press the button to start, and as the dashboard lights up and you snick the blue CVT gear lever into drive, you're greeted by the sound of silence that's such a trademark of petrol-electric motoring. So much so that as you gently brush the throttle and the car pulls noiselessly away, you're tempted to worry whether something might be wrong. But no, this is how it is in hybrid land. How far will this car go in totally silent milk float mode? Not a great distance, in fact. Press this EV button down here by the handbrake and you'll cover no more than 1.2 miles before the engine cuts in, something that'll happen even sooner if your speed exceeds 31 miles an hour. But to concentrate on figures of that kind is rather to miss the point. The hybrid synergy drive system is always recharging itself, the more so if you snick the CVT gear lever into B to maximise the energy that you can harvest from regenerative braking. As a result, the car is nearly always ready to revert to battery power in city traffic. So much so that Toyota's real-world tests suggest that silent zero-emissions motoring is possible in around 66% of the average commuting journey length and around 58% of the total journey time. It's hard to square this sort of refinement with a class of car that's usually, well, a bit buzzy at most speeds. This, in contrast, is a very different, very relaxed, very refined means of town travel. Even when the little petrol engine does cut in, you'll hardly notice it, unless you happen to be driving foot to the floor, a style of progress really to be discouraged in this Yaris, not only because it decimates your fuel and CO2 returns, but also because as the revs rise, the eCVT, continuously variable automatic gearbox, whines, and you don't ultimately end up going that much faster. That's in the mid-range. To be fair, progress from rest is actually quite rapid. Thanks to the electric motor's ability to deliver all of its torque, its maximum pulling power, that's 160 Newton meters of grunt, right from the moment you start to accelerate. Progress in the battery part of the acceleration curve from 0 to 31 miles an hour is actually quite rapid, taking about 4 seconds. From then on, though, things start to slow down quite rapidly. For instead of under the bonnet the 1.8 litre petrol engine you'll find developing 98 brake horsepower in a Prius hybrid or 136 brake horsepower in an Yaris hybrid, this Yaris gets a smaller, feebler 73 brake horsepower. 1.5 litre engine borrowed from the second generation Prius model that went out of production in 2009. To be fair, it is a unit that's been completely re-engineered for the modern era, with over 70% of its components either new or redesigned. But it isn't a power plant that particularly prioritises performance, with just 111 Newton meters of torque to call upon. Even so, because of the electric motor's instant urge away from rest, Toyota is able to quote a 0 to 60 mile an hour sprint figure that at 11.8 seconds is actually faster than the apparently more powerful Honda Jazz hybrid, and over 2 seconds quicker than a comparable eco-minded Super Mini diesel. That's provided you haven't selected the eco driving mode option that's operable via this button down here by the handbrake. Now, very often I'll drive a car with this sort of eco-driving mode and wonder why you wouldn't use it all the time. Lots of efficiency benefits with no particular downside. But this isn't one of those cars. You really pay for your parsimony in eco mode, not so much with the tweak that it makes to the air conditioning system, but more with a throttle response that becomes laboured and slow. But then this car prefers to be driven carefully. Nurse it around gently, keeping the blue needle of the hybrid system indicator, it replaces the rev counter here on the dash, in its charge or eco zones, and you'll get in sync with the way that this car likes to operate. Probably even more so if you watch the clever hybrid energy monitor that's on the dash here, keeping you in touch with the way that the battery, the electric motor and the engine are all working together. This is, after all, a Super Mini that really comes into its own when you're doing 0 miles an hour in stop and start traffic. Is that a depressing criterion on which to buy a car? Perhaps, but it's a truism that many people's drive to work isn't all about empty moorland roads and beautifully cambered bends. It's about sitting in stop-start traffic, watching the guy in the car next to you crawl forward as he surreptitiously checks out Facebook on his iPhone. That kind of driving can be stressful, but for many, there's simply no avoiding it. Quite simply, this car takes that stress away. Will that make it feel like a fish out of water when you take to the open road? Well, yes and no. It's not like a really city-based urban scoot, say something like a Smart 4.2 that really doesn't like to go beyond the city limits. In fact, when you take this Yaris Hybrid onto, say, a twisting country lane, you discover that it actually corners quite well, with modest body roll and plenty of grip. Unfortunately, the rather lifeless steering will make you feel unwilling to investigate these limits, a setup that's clearly been prioritised for town work, where it facilitates a class-leadingly tight 4.7 metre turning radius. The ride's clearly been prioritised for urban use too, the extra weight of the hybrid system making the car feel more planted and less disturbed over poor services. Not only will you struggle to recognise this car as a hybrid, But you'll also have the job to tell it apart from any other conventional Yaris, all of which is entirely intentional, of course. The days of enviro-conscious buyers wanting to trumpet their eco-minded pretensions are, thank goodness, rapidly drawing to a close. Buy one of these and the neighbours won't know that you're doing your bit for the polar ice caps, unless, of course, they look a bit more closely. Those who do exactly that might clock the hybrid badging, or the unique chrome-finished projector-type headlamps with their LED daytime running lights, or in the model-specific wheel designs. The better informed amongst them might even note the 20mm of extra front overhang necessary to house the hybrid Synergy drivetrain, or the trapezoidal front grille necessary to cool it. Inside, it's a similar story. At first glance, it's all familiar third-generation Yaris, but look a little closer and differences begin to emerge. The blue CVT gear knob, the blue stitching around the handbrake and the steering wheel, and the blue and white backlighting for the silver-ringed instruments. Come to think of it, the instrumentation's different too, with a hybrid system indicator replacing the usual rev counter on the dash, with a blue needle that'll be in either charge, eco or power zones, depending on the way that you're driving. Much more informative, though, as to what's happening beneath you is the hybrid energy monitor that you'll find in the car section of the Toyota touch infotainment system here in the middle of the dash, showing you at any given time what's being driven or being powered by what. Now, it would be reasonable to expect the usually rather bulky 144-volt nickel metal hydride battery pack necessary for hybrid motoring to impinge upon interior space. It doesn't. That's because the battery pack sits snugly alongside the fuel tank under the rear bench here, which incidentally is why the bench doesn't recline and slide back and forth as it would in a conventional Yaris. A novel transaxle houses the electric motor, the generator, the power split device, and the double motor reduction mechanism in a compact transmission casing that's directly comparable in size to a conventional gearbox. All very interesting, no doubt, for technophobes. But what potential buyers of this Yaris Hybrid need to know is that there's just as much room for people and packages in this car as there would be in any conventional Yaris. If you're not familiar with one of those, then I'll tell you that on this back seat there's comfortable room for 2 adults, but as usual in this class of car, 3 would be a bit of a squash. At least headroom is less of an issue with this generation Yaris, thanks to an increase in height of 30mm over its predecessor. Luggage-wise, there's 286 litres of baggage space with all the seats in place. If you need more, then push forward the 60/40 split folding easy flat seats, and you've got one of the larger luggage areas of any modern Super Mini, 696 litres. Overall, a masterpiece of packaging. Now, in many ways, the price of this car is the most important thing about it. Until the launch of this model, buying a hybrid was something that you paid a premium for, over equivalent petrol power, of course, but also over the price of an equivalent diesel. With this Yaris Hybrid, Toyota's plan was to eliminate that premium, even if it meant recycling old Prius Mark II mechanicals to do it. And largely they've been able to achieve exactly that, something which I have to say may not be terribly obvious at first glance. After all, the pricing for this model starts at, well, just under £15,500 and ranges up to just under £17,500. A sum you may think to be quite high for a Super Mini, even a terribly clever one. But a bit of perspective is needed here. Remember that this model comes only with 5 doors and automatic transmission, along with performance that would make it comparable to a conventional 98 brake horsepower 1.33 VVTi petrol Yaris. Now, that car, equipped to a comparable spec with multi-drive automatic transmission, would cost you only around £700 less. Perhaps a better comparison, though, would be between this Yaris Hybrid and the kind of Yaris 1.4 D4D diesel that would cost you around the same, deliver higher running cost, and not even offer automatic transmission as an option. Viewed in that light, buying this hybrid model would be almost as obvious a step to take as purchasing it in preference to its closest rival, Honda's Jazz Hybrid. That car is around £1,100 pricier, slower, around 30% less frugal, and so much dirtier that at launch it didn't even break the 100 grams per kilometre of CO2 barrier, which meant that it didn't qualify for the kind of low tax rates and free congestion charging that you'll get with this Toyota. I'm guessing too that a number of customers are visiting Toyota showrooms to look at the brand's other slightly larger mainstream hybrid models might well be tempted by this Yaris, unless it really is too compact for them. It's true that both the Yaris Hybrid, which starts from around £20,000, and the Prius, which starts from around £22,000, both use larger, pokier versions of this hybrid synergy drive power plant. But with asking prices for those cars that are 30 to 40% higher than this one, I can see a number of customers starting to think that this Yaris's simpler approach to petrol-electric motoring might start to make more sense. You can see why Toyota thinks that 20% of all future Yaris sales will be of this hybrid model. Which is all well and good, but let's get back to Toyota's objective here. Namely, to deliver a hybrid Super Mini to market with hardly any price premium over a comparable diesel model from a rival maker. Now, have they done it? Well, almost. Toyota points out that a rival Volkswagen Polo Blue Motion 1.2 TDI is around £800 more than a base Yaris Hybrid and is slower and dirtier and less economic. But it's also true that an economical diesel from a mainstream Super Mini maker, something like a Ford Fiesta Econetic, a Vauxhall Corsa 1.3 CDTI EcoFlex, or a Fiat Punto 1.3 Multijet, would apparently save you £1,000 to £2,000 over this car. But then you've got to take account of the fact that models like these are slower, dirtier, thirstier, more poorly specified, will cost you more to maintain, will depreciate faster, and won't even offer automatic transmission as an option. Personally, I'd argue that it would make more sense to compare this Yaris Hybrid with a Super Mini equipped with one of the latest super high-tech 2 or 3 cylinder petrol engines now coming to market. A Fiat Punto Twin Air, for example, would cost you around £2,500 less, but that really is a crude, noisy thing, about as far removed from effortless, silent Yaris hybrid motoring as you could possibly imagine. A better comparison, I think, would be with Ford's clever Fiesta 1-litre EcoBoost 100 PS 3-cylinder unit. Now, that really is a neat piece of engineering, and it's massively frugal for a conventional combustion engined car. But the bottom line is that one of those will travel 15 miles fewer than this Toyota on every gallon of fuel. It will put out 20 grams per kilometre more of CO2. It will make you change gears yourself, and it will only save you around, well, less than £1,000 on this Yaris. If, having considered all of this, you conclude that it is a Yaris Hybrid that you really want, then you're going to need to know what you get for your money, as well as all this clever technology under the bonnet. The answer is a reasonable amount, with even the entry-level T3 variant coming complete with a 6-speaker stereo, dual-zone air conditioning, a trip computer, front electric windows, power mirrors, and headlights that stay on at night to guide you to your front door. Plus, of course, the standard automatic gearbox that only comes on petrol versions of rivals, and then only for an extra £1,000 or so. Most buyers, though, are going to want to trade up to the sweet spot in the Yaris Hybrid model lineup, the mid-range T4 model, and there are two reasons why. First, because it's this variant that introduces the clever Toyota Touch infotainment system with its 6.1-inch colour touchscreen and multimedia interface with full AUX in and USB compatibility, plus easy access to controls for the stereo, the trip computer and Bluetooth phone compatibility. Now, most owners will want to upgrade this system to what Toyota calls touch and go status, which, as the name suggests, gives you also satellite navigation with speed camera warnings and via your mobile phone access to Google local search and connected services. And that'll give you information on the move like fuel prices, local parking information and even weather forecasts. This top T-Spirit model gets the Toyota Touch system with the sat-nav option too, and seems tempting with its cruise control, its rain-sensing wipers and its part leather upholstery. But unfortunately it also gets a larger set of 16-inch alloy wheels that make quite a dent in the running cost figures, which is why it makes more sense to buy the mid-range T4 model and buy a few well-chosen features from the options list. But whichever Yaris model you choose, it'll come well specified as far as safety is concerned. This car's 5-star full house Euro NCAP safety score comes courtesy of the fact that it is fitted complete with 7 airbags, including a driver's knee bag and Isofix child seat fastenings. The anti-lock brakes have a brake assist feature for emergency stops, and there's a VSA vehicle stability control system. Is this the cheapest means of super mini motoring when you add everything all together? No, of course it isn't. Whatever contender you're looking at in this sector, a bog standard entry-level petrol model will always ultimately make more sense when you take into account the low annual mileages that owners of this kind of car tend to do. But for what it is, this Yaris Hybrid represents a remarkably frugal way to get about. Now this is thanks not only to petrol-electric cleverness and things like low rolling resistance tyres and a class-leadingly slippery 0.28 CD drag coefficient, but also to the success of Toyota's efforts in keeping the weight of the hybrid synergy drive system down. Impressively, a Yaris Hybrid weighs only around 75 kilograms more than comparable and conventional Yaris 1.33 VVTi petrol model with a broadly similar CVT automatic gearbox. To put that figure into perspective, that's probably less than the weight in some cars of adding electrically operated seats versus manual ones. Of course, there's not much point in Toyota having gone to all this trouble if you thrash the thing about, so it's important that you concentrate on driving this car as its designers intended, keeping the hybrid indicator's blue needle out of the top power section and instead in either the eco zone, which designates careful eco-minded progress, or in the lower charge section, into which the needle will dip when braking or cruising. Provided you manage that, the Japanese brand reckons you should get somewhere close to their quoted 80.7 miles to the gallon combined cycle fuel figure, a reading that rises to an astonishing 91.1 miles to the gallon on the urban cycle. That makes this 1.5 litre hybrid around 10% more economic than Toyota's 1.8 litre hybrid Yaris or Prius hybrid models, as you would expect, given that the Yaris hybrid system is 20% smaller and 11 kilograms lighter. And against rival diesel super minis, well, the quoted figure is the same as you'll get in a Volkswagen Polo 1.2 TDI Blue Motion, and only a little less than you'd get in a Ford Fiesta 1.6 TDCi E-Kinetic, but better than virtually any other eco-branded diesel super mini you can think of. And of course you'll be filling up with cheaper petrol rather than diesel fuel. Talking of petrol, in comparison to rival 2 or 3 cylinder high-tech petrol units, say the 2-cylinder twin-air engine of a Fiat Punto or the 3-cylinder 1-litre EcoBoost unit of a Ford Fiesta, well, you'll be travelling around 15 miles further in this Yaris Hybrid than you would in one of those on every gallon of fuel. And CO2? Well, here this Toyota has a clear advantage. with the exception of all-electric cars or pricey plug-in models like Toyota's own Prius plug-in, this is the cleanest car available on the UK market, putting out a saintly 79 grams per kilometre of CO2, a figure not even the most frugal and cleanest diesels can get near. This figure gives you all the usual eco-minded running cost benefits. No road tax to pay, free entry to the congestion charging zone and so on, many of which you'd have to forego in a rival Honda Jazz Hybrid because it doesn't get under the magic 100 grams per kilometre of CO2 barrier. Overall, you'd also be looking at 39 pence per mile to run this car, as opposed to 42 pence per mile for an equivalent Honda Jazz Hybrid over a typical 3-year, 30,000 mile cycle. That's assuming that you order a T3 or T4 mainstream Yaris Hybrid model, rather than this T-Spirit top-of-the-range variant that I'm driving here. Now, the T-Spirit comes with a set of larger 16-inch alloy wheels that make a surprisingly large difference to the running costs of this car. Fuel consumption on the combined cycle dropping to 76.3 miles to the gallon, and the CO2 return deteriorating to 85 grams per kilometre. That's still pretty good, mind you. Maintenance costs will be lower than with a conventional petrol or diesel Super Mini. After all, the hybrid Synergy drive system has proven its impressive reliability over nearly 2 decades of use and operates without the need for a clutch, a starter motor, an alternator or a timing belt. So there's no need for items like these to be maintained or replaced. And the efficiency of the electronically controlled braking system means that brake pads can last up to 60,000 miles before replacement. What else? Well, this car attracts a benefit-in-kind company car tax rating of just 10%, and business operators can claim a 100% write-down for this vehicle in the first year of ownership. Insurance ranges between groups 8 and 9, which should make it affordable for younger drivers, and compares very well to the group 16 that you'd need for an equivalent Honda Jazz Hybrid. There's a 5-year, 100,000 mile Toyota warranty, which extends to 8 years and 100,000 miles for the hybrid Synergy drive system's componentry. Residual value projections, meanwhile, are strong, with independent assessments suggesting that after 3 years and 36,000 miles, you should get around 30% of your initial purchase price back. It's usually the case that the more you pay for a Super Mini, the more comprehensively you miss the point. These cars are supposed to be cheap and cheerful things you don't get too precious about. I think, though, that in the case of this Yaris Hybrid, you'd be prepared to make an exception to that rule. This, after all, is not some kind of premium, soft-touch, leather-lined piece of ostentation. Instead, it's a smart, satisfying and genuinely useful small hatch. The kind of car that you'd feel that you could downsize into from something a lot bigger without feeling too hard done by. Now, you'll find this Toyota about as frugal as the kind of decently pokey diesel Super Mini that will cost you about the same. But I think if I was target market for this Yaris Hybrid, what would sway me towards ownership wouldn't have much to do with the balance sheet. No, what really impresses me about this car is its serenity in the city, its refreshingly soothing antidote to the stress of the urban commute. And that's something that no diesel or small-engined petrol rival will ever be able to match up to. After all, if you regularly commute in town, then crawling through traffic probably takes up quite a bit of your day, and in turn, quite a bit of your life. If you can't eradicate that time, then you can at least make it a bit less objectionable. And I can't think of a small car that does a better job of exactly that than this one. Cleaner and cheaper than other conventional hybrids, this Yaris may not be very exciting, but it's devastatingly effective at fulfilling its urban-minded eco-remit. And at the end of the day, you can't ask for much more than that.